April 1970, 200,000 miles away from Earth. 3 NASA astronauts are on their way to the moon, a promise that humanity was about to take another giant step into the unknown. Suddenly, an explosion rocks their spaceship. Static fills the radio, and the words that would never be forgotten, "Houston, we have a problem." 2 days into the Apollo 13 mission, one of the oxygen tanks exploded. Power was lost. Oxygen was leaking into space. The crew, led by Jim Lovell, was stranded in a failing spacecraft, and their dream of landing on the moon was gone in an instant. Now, their only focus had to be survival. They retreated into the tiny lunar module, a craft designed for 2 people for 2 days, not 3 people for 4. And then came the real crisis. Carbon dioxide levels began to rise. They were just hours away from suffocating to death. We breathe in oxygen and breathe out carbon dioxide. On Earth, plants absorb carbon dioxide and produce oxygen, which helps keep the air balanced. But inside a sealed spacecraft, there are no trees. The air must be filtered and cleaned by machines. NASA engineers in Houston, Texas, now faced an impossible challenge. The carbon dioxide scrubbers, the filters that clean the air, were just incompatible with the lunar module. The command module used square filters, and the lunar module used round openings. The astronauts were breathing through a system that couldn't clean their air. The engineers had to make a square peg fit into a round hole. Their only hope of survival was to create carbon dioxide filters using only the random materials available on the spacecraft. Duct tape, cardboard, plastic tubes, socks, and plastic bags. In a room in Houston, engineers dumped out a box of these items and went to work. This moment captures something far greater than just a space mission, because when humans are pushed to the edge, we do our most brilliant thinking. Research published in the Journal of Experimental Social Psychology shows that moderate constraints increase creative output because they force deeper problem analysis. When people don't rely on easy solutions, they explore alternatives more carefully. At the same time, studies on choice overload, including research from Columbia University, show that too many options reduce action. When people face unlimited choices, decision-making slows down. Resources help, but unlimited resources can reduce focus. They remove distractions, they force prioritization, constraints narrow attention. Think about writing an essay at home with no deadline whatsoever. It's very easy to delay. You check your phone, you doom scroll, you go get a snack, you'll tell yourself you'll start a bit later. Now think about writing an essay during an exam with 50 minutes on the dot. I bet you organized your ideas quickly, and I bet you wrote without stopping. Your intelligence didn't change, the constraint did. Time pressure increases task engagement. Studies in performance psychology show that clear deadlines improve concentration and reduce procrastination. The limit sharpens attention. Necessity has always been the mother of invention. Piece by piece, the NASA engineers built a rough, awkward contraption. They didn't have time, money, or tools, just scraps and desperation. Somehow, that was enough. Apollo 13 never reached the moon, yet it became one of NASA's greatest triumphs, not because of where the spacecraft went, but because of what people on the ground and in the air were able to achieve under pressure. Michelangelo's statue of David was carved from a block of Carrara marble thought to be rejected. They were broken and left in a courtyard for over 25 years. The sculpture had visible cracks and structural weaknesses and had been left exposed for more than 25 years because artists believed it was unusable. Instead of discarding it, Michelangelo studied its flaws. He adjusted his design to carve through weak areas. He carved strategically without ever breaking the stone. The limitations of the marble forced and shaped the final sculpture. That flaws forced precision. Beethoven began losing his hearing in his late 20s. And by his mid-40s, he was almost completely deaf. For a composer, this should have ended everything, his life and his career. Yet during this period, he wrote some of his most celebrated works, including his Ninth Symphony. Unable to hear fully, he relied on memory, vibration, and deep knowledge of musical structure. And we believe that these limitations pushed him towards more compositions and bold music pieces. He was no longer guided by any performance feedback. His deafness did not stop his creativity. In fact, it transformed it. The same pattern appears in technology. The Apollo guidance computer that helped land astronauts on the moon had only 64 kilobytes of memory. In comparison, that is less storage than a single modern photograph. The engineers had to write highly efficient code. Every instruction mattered. Every line of code significant. There was absolutely no room for waste. Today, we have powerful machines and unlimited storage, yet software often becomes bloated and inefficient because the optimization feels optional. Scarcity demands efficiency, and abundance can allow carelessness. When I was building an application on a simple laptop, it had very limited RAM. Each time I ran my program, it froze during compilation. The processor overloaded when too many background tasks were active. At first, I felt so frustrated, but then it began to change how I think. I reduced the background processes, I simplified my code structure, and I removed non-essential features. I rewrote memory-heavy functions, and instead of adding more, I had refined what already existed. Research in engineering education shows that resource constraints improve systems thinking because they force deeper problem analysis. And they also impart deeper understanding of core mechanics. When tools are limited, problem solvers must engage with fundamentals instead of simply relying on brute force. My slow laptop forced me to understand efficiency, and it changed how I think about building solutions to this very day. However, there's another side to this. When everything is possible, we can get stuck in what's called analysis paralysis. Too many options, too much freedom, and progress just stalls. Constraints narrow our choices, forcing us to act, decide, and build something now instead of waiting for ideal conditions. That's exactly what NASA engineers did. They had a crisis, a deadline, and a box of scraps. That urgency turned impossible into possible. In art, music, and science alike, boundaries sharpen focus. Architects design within strict building codes and limited space, yet those rules inspire unique shapes and structures. Game developers working with very old consoles created iconic pixel art not because it was trendy, but because they were specifically limited by technology. Those same constraints defined a whole visual style that we still admire today. In Houston, engineers tested prototypes again and again until one worked. In space, astronauts carefully followed step-by-step instructions, cutting cardboard, sealing plastic, securing tape, until the square filter fit into the round system. Carbon dioxide levels dropped. The astronauts could breathe again. They survived because people refused to wait for better conditions. Innovation starts when comfort ends. Sometimes the most powerful breakthroughs are born when everything goes wrong. So the next time you're faced with a problem that feels too big, too sudden, or too overwhelming, remember this. Innovation isn't the end. Sometimes it's the beginning of creativity. You might not have everything you want, but you always have something you can use. Don't panic, and instead, pause, breathe, look at what's in front of you and start building with whatever you've got. Thank you.